Hello friends. Oh, welcome back. Oh no, that's too close. Okay. Hopefully let's the sun is like just shining through the window right now and it is just giving me life. It's so gorgeous because it's been raining for days. I have finally made our second knitting video. So today we are learning how to purl. So the last video I posted was learning how to knit, and today we're going to be learning how to purl, which is arguably the second easiest stitch to learn, and you can actually make a lot of really beautiful things just knowing the knit and purl stitch. So as I said before, you'll just need a few items such as knitting needles, scissors, and some yarn. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it that you'll need today. If you have not watched my prior video, feel free to pause this one, go watch that. It kind of gives you the full rundown of how to cast on, how to do a long tail cast on, how to do the knit stitch, etc. So if you have not knit before, I'd recommend you go watch that one first. Otherwise, you can feel free to continue on with this video and learn the purl stitch with me. I would love if you could subscribe, join our little family here. There's lots of fun things happening in the next little while. So yeah, yes, if you would like to follow along, if you'd like to support me, just please like, subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Today we are learning how to purl. The first thing you are going to need is, of course, a ball of yarn, a pair of knitting needles. I'm using the same knitting needles I used in my last video, Learn How to Knit, and I will leave the details below, and a nice pair of scissors. So we're going to start the exact same way we started our knitting tutorial, which is casting on, and I'm going to be using the long tail cast on. I am going to do this a little bit quicker this time. If you need a more in-depth instruction, check out my last video and I go through it in much more detail. So once again, I'm just going to make my nice little slip knot like so. I have a nice long tail on one side, and then I have my ball of yarn connected on the other side. I'm going to slide my knitting needle through, give it a little pull, and complete my 10 cast-ons. So 1, 2, once again, I'll show you really slowly what I'm doing. So I have got the yarn with my bottom 3 fingers. I'm going to open up with my top 2 and go through and up, over to the other side, and through. And please check out my other video if that was way too quickly. So I'm just going to do my 10. And typically I would not use this thin of a yarn on such a large knitting needle, but just for the purpose of visually showing you guys, I thought it would be helpful. So let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. So I do have quite a long tail here. Just make sure you're not knitting with that. So I'm just going to tuck it there. And I have my lovely stitches. So as you can see, they're all evenly spaced out. I've got the actual item forming on the right hand side, and all I'm going to do is purl. So the way that you purl is, instead of going through and behind like you do with a knit stitch, you're actually going to go down and wrap it around. So the main difference of the purl stitch is your yarn is always going to start at the front. So typically with the knit stitch that we were talking about last week, you start with the yarn behind, and it's always behind. You wrap it around, and then you create those 2 stitches. But with a knit stitch, your yarn is always going to be in front. So you've got your 2 knitting needles like so, your yarn is in the front, and I actually go down in front of my knitting needles here, give it a little tug, wrap it around, a little tug. It's still creating that nice split in the stitch, and pulling it through, and then taking it off. Oh, it's so loose. And we'll just give it a little tug right there. Our purl stitch is going to be, the yarn is in the front. I'm going to just tuck that once more. I'm going to put my knitting needle through the front of that stitch, just like so. Then I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to wrap it around the front, just like so. And then it creates that nice split in the middle. And I'm going to push it down and up. and then I'm going to throw that stitch off just like I do with my knit stitch. All right, so once more, I'm going to go through the front, and I always kind of just keep a nice finger on this here so it doesn't get tangled. I still have that nice cross that I talked about last week, but it's in the front this time. Then I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to wrap it around, create that split in my stitch as you can see there, and then I'm going to pull my right needle through the other side of the stitch and off. Whoopsies, there we are. I'm going to do this a few more times and you should start seeing a nice pattern. Now, of course, the first row is always going to be a little bit more difficult. Perhaps your tension won't be perfect. And when I speak about tension, it means how tightly you knit. And that, of course, also is impacted by the type of knitting needles you're using and the type of yarn you're using. And my very last stitch. Now you have completed your very first purl row. As you can see, oh, I'm just going to pull that a little bit tighter there. So as you can see, we still have all of our stitches on the left and we have our work being created from the right. And as you can see, you've got a nice little pattern. You've almost got those V's starting to show. And then on the opposite side, you've got these lovely loops, just like so. So when you start getting into a little bit more advanced knitting, when you mix the knit and the purl stitch, you can have variations. So the knit stitch is associated with these triangles and the purl stitch is associated with these little bumps in the pattern. So let's do one more row and then I will let you guys go off and finish your 10 rows so we can look at our work once it's complete. So once again, sometimes the first stitch is going to be super loose, so sometimes it'll kind of be like that. You just got to give it a little bit of a tug on the yarn that is connected to your ball of yarn. So just give it a bit of a tug and make sure that you're holding it a little bit more taut when you're transferring it over. So once again, we're going to start a new row. So I'm going to take my right knitting needle, I'm going to go through the front, making sure that this yarn is in the front. Okay, I've created my cross, giving a little bit of a tug. I'm going to wrap it around my knitting needle, pull, and it's going to create that split in the stitch there. And I'm going to take this point of the needle and I'm going to go through there. So I'm going to go down. There is the new stitch right there. And then I can just pop that off and give it a little bit of a tug, just like so. So once again, down, around, through, and off. Down, around, through, and off. And there we are. Got our second row there. And of course our knitting is going to be a lot looser because of the type of knitting needles that I'm using. But we've still got that pattern forming on this side. And then on this side, we have those bumps that I was talking about. So we have our first row of bumps down here. And then we have our second row of bumps right there. I will let you guys finish your next 8 rows. So we've done 2 rows already, and now you can knit your 10 rows and we will check back in once you have done that. You should have something that looks similar to this. Now remember, if you're using a smaller set of needles or a different type of yarn, yours might look a little different, which is totally fine. But the main thing that you are looking for when you are doing a strictly purl stitched knit are these little bumps. So you can see one bump going up, one bump going down, up, down, and then we kind of have that almost a V in the middle. And then if we flip it to the opposite side, you will see that the opposite happens. So whenever there's a bumpy row on this side, it'll be that triangular look. And that is your lovely purl stitch. Now before I continue and show you some other ways that the purl and the knit stitch can be incorporated together, because typically I would rarely knit something that is strictly one stitch. I like to combine the 2 stitches, and even though it might seem intimidating right now, it's actually super easy to do, and there's a lot of different rules that you can follow, like knit the knit, purl the purl, or you can do the opposite, and it's just kind of fun to see the different patterns that can happen when you do switch up your stitch. And before I show you guys that, I am going to cast off. So once again, we're going to do our super simple cast off. Now last week I showed you the cast off with a knit stitch. This week we're just going to do the purl stitch, which is the opposite. So I'm going to stitch 2 stitches, so 2 purl stitches like I've been doing, as if I were starting off a new row. I do always want to make sure I'm just tugging that nice and tight. Purl, and again, I'm just going to tug that tight again. Now, like I did last week, I have our 2 stitches here, and I'm going to simply bring first stitch that I stitched on over top of the second. So I'm going to pull it and bring it over and loop it off just like so. All right, I'm going to do the next one. So purl another, give that a tug a bit, purl another. You can also put your needle in and pull it over. You can use a crochet hook, but I just find using my fingers is the easiest way. Now, you don't want to pull too tight on this because then sometimes your cast off can be a little wonky, but you don't want it to be super loose either. So go with your gut, pull enough so it makes sense and it doesn't wiggle around too much, but also don't try and break your yarn. Pull over that stitch again, and then we are on our last sew. Purl that last stitch. Our one needle will come free and pull that over. And then we're simply just going to give that a little tug, take out our needle, and tie it off. Just going to trim the sides, so cutting my yarn that's connected to the ball. I'm going to pull it through this loop here, give it a tug, and then you can always sew this back in. And then I'm going to cut the tail that I had as well. And now we have this. So as you can see, it's not the most attractive thing in the world. This is for 2 main reasons. The yarn that I used was way too thin to create the pattern and the style that I wanted for my knitting needles, but I just wanted to show you in a way that was easily visible, so please keep that in mind. As you can see, we've got our lovely cast off here, so it's creating that V, and the only real issue that I have with this at the moment are the sides. The sides are a little bit loose, and that again is attributed to the size of the knitting needles. But if you have successfully accomplished this and you've got your lovely little bumps, and on the opposite side you've got your bumps and your little V's, then you have successfully completed a purl knit project, and you should be very proud. So before we end off this video, I am going to show you a few other things that you can do with this lovely type of knitting. So here I have a washcloth, dishcloth, cloth in general that was created using a knit and purl stitch. So on this side you see all the V's, this is the knit stitch, and on this side you see those little bumps, and that is the purl stitch. And then on the corners here I have something called a seed stitch that we can talk about when I actually show you how to make this lovely cloth.